The bruise on my hip was still fresh when I overheard my son and daughter-in-law debating who'd get the house first. As I lay there on the floor, I counted their footsteps. None of them moved toward me. While the tea kettle screamed from the kitchen, it struck me how betrayal always sounds ordinary. The same kettle she gifted me last Christmas, after filing the deed change behind my back. That's when I realized I wasn't the one slipping away. They were. So I got up, signed 3 forms, and made sure they'd inherit nothing but silence. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The wind cut off the Damariscotta River like it was late for something, sliding across the bluff and rattling the wind chimes Helen Ward hadn't taken down since last summer. The clink of metal was irregular, brittle, like the house itself, which sat at the edge of the pine woods, looking out over gray water and darker sky. Helen watched the trees from her kitchen window, waiting for the kettle to boil. She didn't check her phone. She didn't check the mail. She just waited. The smell of burnt toast hovered in the air, ignored. Her hands, steady as ever, sliced a banana with small, precise movements, a soft snap with each cut. The kettle screamed. She turned it off before it could finish. She poured the hot water over a tea bag in a white mug that said, "World's okayest mom," a gift from her son years ago. She'd laughed when he gave it to her. Now it lived in the back of the cabinet and only came out when she wasn't expecting company. Helen walked slowly across the kitchen, her slippers quiet on the warped wood floor. The radio on the counter buzzed low, a local public station playing soft jazz no one really listened to. She kept it on for the same reason she kept the furnace turned up higher than necessary, because silence had its own kind of bite. She paused at the hallway mirror. Her face was a map, lines she recognized, a few she didn't. 74, and her eyes still looked 29. Tom used to say that. "You've got eyes that don't give up," he'd said once, while brushing sawdust off his flannel. He'd been gone 5 years last December. A quiet, clean death. If there was such a thing. She put on her fleece jacket and zipped it halfway up. The mail needed to be checked. The front step was still slick with overnight frost, but the sun was out now. It wouldn't last. Nothing did. Outside, the world smelled like wet pine and melting ice. The wind had settled into a chill that scraped against her cheeks. She stepped carefully across the porch, gripping the railing out of habit, down the steps, across the gravel path, to the rusted mailbox that leaned just slightly to the left. Like everything around here, worn but stubborn. Inside were 2 envelopes and a glossy real estate flyer. She recognized the brokerage logo instantly. Leslie's firm. Helen held it in her hand for a long moment, staring at the full-color photo of a cheerful white colonial with black shutters and the words, "Downsize without compromise," splashed across the bottom in blue cursive. She didn't bother opening it. Back inside, the answering machine was blinking. 2 new messages. First message, 9:12 a.m. "Hi, Mom. Just checking if you got the draft from Leslie's office. We need to move this along before the end of the month. Let me know you're on board." Second message, 10:27 a.m. "Also, remember to stay off the ladder. Just hire someone. Seriously." Helen deleted both messages without playing them all the way through. She returned to the kitchen, sat at the table, and finally took a bite of her cold oatmeal. It stuck to the roof of her mouth like paste. She chewed slowly, staring at the corner of the room where a bit of wallpaper had started peeling again. Nate used to visit every month, bring groceries, clean the gutters. But after Tom's funeral, the visits grew shorter. Then came Leslie with her polished words and clipped tone and real estate license. Things shifted. Meetings were scheduled without asking. Legal documents arrived without discussion. She didn't remember when she stopped being Helen and started being a liability. After breakfast, she pulled on boots and gloves and went outside again. The wind had picked up, scattering pine needles across the porch. The ladder from last weekend's gutter cleaning still leaned against the side of the house. She stared at it. Her back was sore and her knees cracked. But she didn't feel weak, not yet. She didn't need a real estate flyer to tell her what her life was worth, or a power of attorney packet drawn up in haste. She stepped toward the ladder, paused, then walked past it. The bird feeders needed refilling. The yard was soft and uneven from the thaw, and each step was careful, not fearful, measured. Life at 74 didn't feel like a slow fade to black. It felt like being erased in pencil, light at first, then firmer, until only a faint impression was left behind. Helen wasn't ready to disappear. The ache in Helen's lower back hummed like an old furnace kicking on, dull but insistent. She lowered herself into the chair at the edge of the dining room table and exhaled through her nose, slow and steady. The Advil had taken the edge off, but she moved like she'd edged a decade since yesterday. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the slim manila folder she'd pulled from the bottom drawer of the sideboard. It wasn't locked. That's how far trust used to go in this house. She hadn't looked at the paperwork in years, not since Nate first brought it over one rainy Tuesday afternoon. All smiles and phrases like just in case and peace of mind. Back then, she still baked on Tuesdays. The pages inside were crisp, neatly tabbed. Legalese lined the paragraphs like barbed wire. Somewhere in the middle, her signature appeared in steady cursive, H. Ward, beneath language granting Nate financial power of attorney effective immediately. She remembered the day too well now. Nate had insisted they take care of it before winter. Leslie sat beside him, nodding in agreement, sipping from a travel mug that smelled like vanilla syrup and ambition. Helen closed the folder and rested both hands flat on its cover. She remembered how Nate's voice had softened when he said, "It's not like we're going to use it. It's just easier if something ever happens." What had happened, apparently, was convenience, and she had let it happen. That was the worst part. Not the signatures, not the forms, the permission, the slow erosion of her authority disguised as helpfulness. She stood and crossed to the hall closet, her joints cracking like dry twigs. From the shelf above the coats, she pulled down a second binder, this one pale blue, labeled simply, Household Essentials. Inside were old bank statements, registration forms, her last car title. One page was paper-clipped to a note in Leslie's handwriting, made it joint to simplify car insurance renewals. "You're welcome." Helen stared at the smiley face for a long moment before placing the paper in a new stack to the right of the folder. Then the bank documents, joint checking. Streamlined, Leslie had called it. Just makes everything less complicated. It had taken years, but now Helen was a guest in her own finances. The doorbell rang, 2 quick chimes. She didn't startle. That bell only rang like that when it was Tamara. Helen opened the door and stepped aside without a word. Tamara let herself in, stomping snow from her boots. "You look like you fell off a horse," Tamara said, eyeing her gait. "Just the porch," Helen replied. "Was it slick?" "No, just me being 74. Tamara raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe 74, and surrounded by jackals." Helen didn't laugh. She limped back to the table and sat, gesturing at the growing stack of paperwork. Tamara peeled off her coat and draped it over a chair. "Is this the mess?" she asked, nodding at the folders. "This is the version they think I don't remember," Helen said. "But I do. Every step." Tamara pulled the chair beside her, slid a few pages over, scanning quickly. "You gonna confront him?" Helen shook her head. "It's not about confrontations anymore." "Then what is it?" Helen looked out the window. The sky was the kind of pale gray that made it impossible to tell if it was morning or late afternoon. A bird flitted past the feeder, then vanished into the woods. "It's about authorship," she said finally. "They've been writing chapters I didn't approve." Tamara leaned back. "So what? You take the pen back?" Helen turned to her, eyes clear, voice even. "No, I never gave it away. I just let them scribble in the margins for too long." Tamara nodded, a small smile pulling at one corner of her mouth. "Then I'm guessing this is the part where things get less polite." Helen picked up the landline, dialed a number from memory. 3 rings. "Wes Chapman," the voice answered. "Wes, it's Helen Ward." A pause. "Well, hey, it's been a minute. I need help unwinding a few things. Quietly. Financial, legal, ownership stuff." Wes cleared his throat. "You're talking about the paperwork with Nate?" "I'm talking about reclaiming what's mine," Helen said. "All of it." There was a beat of silence. Then Wes said, "Come in Monday morning. I'll clear my schedule." She hung up the phone and sat back. Tamara looked at her. "You sure you're up for this?" Helen didn't hesitate. I've never been more awake in my life. The law office of Wes Chapman smelled like lemon oil and old carpet. Helen stepped inside, the cold still clinging to her coat sleeves. Tamara followed close behind, a canvas folder tucked under one arm, and her phone already silenced. Wes stood from behind his desk, taller than Helen remembered, but with the same looseness in the shoulders he'd had back when he coached Little League, and used to yell across the field at Tom to stop micromanaging third base. "Take your time," he said gently, gesturing toward 2 chairs across from him. "No rush today." Helen didn't respond. She just lowered herself into the seat and unzipped her folder. Tamara handed Wes a small stack of printed statements and old asset documents. The weight of the morning settled in as the 3 of them leaned in over the desk like detectives over a decades-old case file. Wes adjusted his glasses and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "So, the accounts, the car, messy but fixable," he said. "But what I'm really worried about is the house." Helen folded her hands, voice steady. "What about it?" Wes flipped to a page from a property record search. The title lists 2 owners, you and Nathan Ward. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Effective as of the 2018 refinance. Helen stared at the page. The words didn't register at first, just the shape of her name beside her son's, fused together in a line she had never intended. "That's not right," she said. "I thought so too," Wes replied. "But it's filed. County office has it stamped, notarized, logged. I pulled the documents myself. This happened after a loan was refinanced through a firm in Augusta, same year Leslie was working at Peterson and Bale." Helen's throat tightened. "I never asked for a refinance." "Then someone did it in your name," Wes said, "or pushed paperwork you didn't fully read." She felt her stomach pitch slightly, not from shock, there was no room for that anymore, but from the weight of inevitability. 1 page. 1 signature. That was all it had taken. Wes continued. "With that survivorship clause, if something were to happen to you, the house would pass automatically to Nate. Not through your will, not through probate, just his." Tamara leaned forward, tapping her finger against the line on the document. "This is theft with a smile." Helen's mouth was dry. "I signed something back then. A stack of forms, refinance details. Leslie said it would lower insurance premiums. I wasn't thinking of ownership changes." "You didn't authorize this," Wes said firmly. "Not knowingly," Helen replied. Wes nodded. "Then it's reversible, but it's time-sensitive. We'd need to file a title correction affidavit, notify the county recorder's office, and submit a fraud statement for the 2018 filing." Tamara opened her folder, revealing a blank affidavit and an already highlighted instruction packet. "You're lucky Wes caught it now," she said. "If anything happens to you before this is reversed, it's gone. You can't fight a deed from a casket." Helen gave her a sideways look. "Not planning on a casket." Tamara smiled faintly. "Then don't leave your name on one that's not yours anymore." The silence in the room stretched out. Just beyond the window, snow flurries started to spin again. Light, hesitant. Helen looked down at the affidavit, then back to Wes. "Let's do it." He reached for a pen, uncapped it, and slid it across the desk. Helen's fingers closed around it slowly. She signed with a single stroke, no pause, no second-guessing. Tamara handed over the next form, a formal fraud documentation statement for the title change. Helen signed that one too. Wes organized the papers into a new folder, labeling it with black marker, House, Correction, and Fraud File. He placed it in his outbox and tapped it once, like sealing a vault. "You'll get a call from the county office this week to verify. I'll be your representative, but they'll want to hear your voice." "They'll hear it," Helen said, loud and clear. Tamara stood, pulling her coat from the back of the chair. 1 step down, Helen followed. 12 more to go. As they walked out into the snow-dusted parking lot, Wes watched from the doorway, a quiet awe in his eyes. Not fear, not pity. Just the recognition of a woman who wasn't asking for her life back. She was taking it. Leslie walked through the front door without knocking, her boots already tracking in a thin film of salt from the driveway. She carried a small leather notebook in one hand, her phone in the other, camera app open, eyes already scanning the living room like she was checking off an invisible list. Helen stood in the archway between the hallway and the kitchen, her expression unreadable, She'd expected Leslie to be early. She hadn't expected her to arrive like a home inspector. "I'll start here," Leslie said briskly, motioning toward the fireplace mantel. "If we ever need to do an insurance filing, it helps to have a full household inventory. Photos, item descriptions, replacement values. I'll send everything to Nate when I'm done, so you two can decide what stays and what." She trailed off mid-sentence. Snapping a picture of the crystal vase, Helen stayed quiet. She watched as Leslie moved from room to room, not with curiosity or care, but with the efficiency of someone cataloging things she believed were already hers. She tapped the side of the antique clock, lifted the corner of a quilt, wrote something in her notebook. "Still have the dining set from Vermont?" Leslie asked, not waiting for an answer before peeking into the dining room. "It's probably appreciated. Solid oak. Might want to get that appraised before you make any estate decisions." Helen's jaw set, but her voice remained calm. "You want some tea while you're working?" Leslie barely looked up. "I'm good, thanks. Just want to get through this while the light's decent." She made her way down the hall, photographing bedroom furniture, taking brief, impersonal glances at family photos without pausing. The home, Helen's home, felt suddenly hollow, like it had been emptied of privacy, as if Leslie wasn't walking through rooms, but through evidence. When she finally circled back to the foyer, Leslie gave a curt nod, flipping her notebook closed. "All right, that's everything I need for now. I'll send over the PDF tonight. Just trying to keep things organized. You know how messy probate can get if things aren't clean." Helen met her eyes. "There won't be a probate issue," Leslie smiled tightly. "Let's hope not." And just like that, she was gone. The moment the storm door hissed shut behind her, Helen turned. She walked straight to the kitchen, pulled her laptop from the cabinet drawer, and opened her bank account. Tamara had shown her how to manage the auto payments last spring. During one of their long coffee mornings, it took less than 10 minutes. Cancel, 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 gone. The bundled internet and security system Leslie had added last year under the guise of family convenience. Gone. The double premium payments on the house, auto-linked to a shared checking account Leslie had insisted would keep things streamlined. Gone. The monthly draw to Nate's clinic, disguised as reimbursement for incidentals that Helen had never agreed to. She closed the laptop, her hands steady. She no longer felt surprise, only clarity. By late afternoon, she was at the hardware store. 15 minutes later, she stood at her front door, unpacking a new deadbolt and knob set from a plastic bag. The old lock came off with minimal effort. She'd changed plenty of things in this house before: paint colors, curtains, cabinet handles. The locks were no different. That night, a small fireproof safe arrived by courier. Helen signed for it and placed it beneath the side table in her bedroom closet. The weight of it was comforting, like setting a boundary that couldn't be undone with a phone call or forged document. The next morning, Tamara arrived with a compact scanner and a laptop. "Today we go digital," she said. "Redundancy saves lives and lawsuits." They worked methodically, page by page. Helen pulled the original will, the title correction affidavit Wes had submitted, utility bills, bank statements, and printed screenshots from her recent account changes. Tamara scanned and labeled everything, backing it all up to both a flash drive and a cloud folder Helen now had sole access to. "You ever notice," Tamara said as she fed another document through, "that Leslie walks through your house like she's still trying to decide where to put the piano she hasn't bought yet?" Helen gave a quiet snort. "She walks through it like it's already empty." "Well," Tamara said, arching an eyebrow, "it's not, and it won't be. You're still here." "I am," Helen said, smoothing a fresh stack of documents, "and I'm not going anywhere." The final folder finished scanning. Tamara closed the laptop and stretched. "That's everything, digital and physical. It's all in your hands now." Helen nodded. The control felt real for the first time in months. Later that evening, she carried the flash drive to the safe, slid it into the inner compartment, and locked it. One key stayed with her. The backup went into a drawer no one else touched. The house was quiet again, but it was a different quiet than before, not empty. Just hers. Wes Chapman's voice came through crisp and calm on the speakerphone, underscored by the quiet shuffle of papers in his office. "It's official," he said. "As of yesterday at 2:14 p.m., Nathan Ward no longer has access to any financial accounts linked to your name. Checking, savings, even the joint cards for household expenses. He's been removed entirely. Helen stood at the kitchen counter, one hand resting on the edge of the sink, the other steadying the phone. Her coffee had gone cold beside her, untouched. Wes continued. I confirmed the action with both institutions. The changes are final. He'll get notified by mail, not electronically, just like you requested. Helen's voice was low, composed. And the auto drafts? Cancelled. Account alerts are now sent to your cell only. No shared permissions. You're the sole account holder on every asset moving forward. She nodded slowly, though Wes couldn't see it. Thank you. From the breakfast table, Tamara offered a small, quiet smile. She was folding the instruction sheet from the safe, careful and precise, the way some people folded flags. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. After the call ended, Helen moved with quiet intent. She opened her laptop and logged into her bank's fraud protection center. The process wasn't fast, but it was thorough. Each form asked the same thing in slightly different ways. Were you coerced? Were funds used without your knowledge? Did someone imply they had your permission when they didn't? Helen ticked yes where it applied. No embellishments, no dramatics, just the truth, laid out in neat rows like bones in a forensic tray. When she finished, she clicked submit. The final screen read, request accepted. A representative will contact you within 48 hours. But she didn't wait. By 1 p.m., she was at the local branch, ID in hand, standing across from a young woman in a navy blue blouse whose name tag read Julie, customer specialist. I want every printed monthly statement for the last 2 years, Helen said. Checking, savings, joint account activity. Every withdrawal made in my name, whether I was present for it or not. Julie blinked. That's quite a bit. We could mail. I'll wait here, Helen said. However long it takes. Julie nodded and disappeared into the back. Tamara sat beside her, flipping idly through an old magazine someone had left on the lobby table. She didn't speak until they were alone again. Most people would have just closed the accounts and moved on, she said. Helen's eyes didn't leave the counter. That's what they're counting on. An hour later, Julie returned with 2 thick envelopes, heavy with documentation. Helen took them, her hands steady. Thank you. Back home, she labeled a new file folder in clean black ink. Financial, fraud, potential court. She slid the envelopes inside, sealed it, and filed it next to the affidavit, the deed, and the notarized account closure form Wes had prepared. Tamara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. You're not just cleaning house, she said quietly. You're burning the rot. Helen didn't flinch. They thought age made me soft, she said, turning. It made me surgical. Tamara's expression cracked into something between admiration and concern. Remind me never to cross you. You wouldn't, Helen said. You know the difference between trust and territory. That night, Helen sat at the dining table with a red pen and the stack of printed bank statements. She flipped through them one by one, marking every unauthorized withdrawal, every convenience transfer Nate had made under her name, every expense that reeked of entitlement. Gas station charges in towns she hadn't driven through, meal expenses for people she didn't know, a Bluetooth speaker, 2 hotel stays, and a suspiciously large veterinary bill. Helen hadn't owned a pet in years. Each mark bled red onto the page like a wound reopening. When she finished, she counted. 27 flagged transactions. A few small, one over $4,000. She leaned back in her chair, the overhead light casting a soft halo around her. The air in the room felt different now, sharper, like the walls themselves had stopped tolerating silence. She opened her planner, flipped to a blank page, and started a new list. At the top she wrote, reclaimed. Underneath it she wrote the date. Then she wrote the number 27. Then she drew a short line. The space beneath it would stay empty, for now. She closed the planner and set it down. Tomorrow she'd visit the notary, and then she'd call the accountant. Not because she needed help, but because she was ready to let someone else witness what had been taken, and what she was taking back. Helen stood at the edge of Leslie's porch, gloves tucked under one arm, manila folder in hand. Her posture was crisp, not defiant, but unmistakably clear. This wasn't a social visit. This wasn't weakness wrapped in pleasantries. This was business. The door opened before she could knock. Nate stood there, surprise flickering behind the polite smile he forced. "Mom, didn't expect you till later." "You sent the text," Helen said calmly, stepping past him without waiting for an invitation. "I came." Inside, the house smelled faintly of eucalyptus and lemon cleaner, Leslie's trademark. Everything was in its place. Throw pillows fluffed, coasters aligned on the coffee table, but something in the air felt too arranged, like a stage set just before curtain. Leslie emerged from the hallway, holding a tablet and a glass of sparkling water. "Helen," she said, her smile tight. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." "I wasn't given much choice," Helen replied. Removing her coat and folding it neatly over the back of the nearest chair, she sat without waiting to be offered a seat. Nate cleared his throat, already reaching for a folder on the counter. "We wanted to walk you through a few thoughts we've had. Big picture stuff, estate optimization, forward planning, retirement options. We've been speaking with a financial advisor." "You've been speaking," Helen cut in, her voice level. Nate hesitated but continued, flipping open the folder and sliding a page across the table. Helen glanced down. A chart. Projected home sale values. Comparisons of 3-bedroom properties in her zip code. Estimated cash-out scenarios. Notes in blue ink circled around a figure with 6 zeros. "We're just exploring possibilities," Leslie said lightly. "Now that you're thinking about downsizing, if that's something on your mind, there are smarter ways to approach equity and reduce tax exposure." "I'm not thinking about downsizing," Helen said, not moving an inch. Leslie pressed on. "Well, we thought if the home's value peaks in the next year, it might be wise to act now. You could sell while it's hot and invest the remainder into a low-risk annuity. Nate could handle the maintenance stuff in the meantime." Helen looked between them. Nate, posture too straight, too rehearsed. Leslie, sipping water with one ankle crossed neatly over the other. "Sounds like you've made plans," Helen said. "Pity no one asked me." The silence that followed was sharp. Nate started to speak, but Helen had already opened her folder. She laid out the first sheet. "This," she said, sliding it across the table, "is a new power of attorney. Filed last week. It revokes any prior rights Nathan held." The second sheet followed. "This is a certified copy of the updated deed to the house. Your names are no longer on it in any capacity. It was corrected with a title affidavit and verified by the county clerk." A third document. Another slide. "And this is the legal revocation of all financial access Nate previously held. Joint account permissions, automatic withdrawals, cosign authority, all removed. As of last week." She tapped the stack once, lightly, like a judge's gavel closing session. "I brought hard copies," she added, "since you two seem to like documentation." Nate didn't reach for the pages. He just stared, his face unreadable but taut around the mouth. Leslie, for once, didn't speak. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the fridge and the faint tick of a decorative wall clock behind them. "I'm not confused about what this was," Helen said after a long pause. "This wasn't a planning meeting. It was a soft ambush, a pressure pitch to transfer ownership under the banner of family concern." Nate's hands twitched at the edge of the table. "We were trying to help." "No," Helen said simply. "You were trying to consolidate." Leslie folded her arms. "We didn't think you'd want to handle everything yourself at this stage." "I'm not at a stage," Helen replied. "I'm in a process, and I'm handling it." The stillness stretched. Nate looked down at the chart he'd printed. Leslie blinked once, sharply, like something had cracked behind the surface. Helen stood and gathered the papers. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. "I didn't come here to explain myself," she said, placing the folder back under her arm. "I came so there'd be no confusion, no room for interpretation. Going forward, all access requires written request, legal justification, and my approval. That includes any mention of my name, my house, or my finances in any external advisement." "We clear?" Neither of them spoke. "I'll take that as yes," Helen said, turning toward the door. "Have a good evening." She walked out without another word. The porch light flicked on behind her as the door clicked shut. Back in the living room, Leslie stared at the printout still lying on the table. Nate didn't look at her. Neither of them noticed that Helen hadn't left a single page behind. Helen returned to the same table, in the same house, with the same people. But the silence that had once been sharp now felt dense, like air thick with the scent of something scorched. Nate sat with his hands clasped, knuckles taut. Leslie, lips pressed into a tight line, didn't even try to smile this time. Helen placed a smaller folder on the table this time, no fanfare. She sat, centered her hands in her lap, and took a moment before speaking. "I brought documentation," she said calmly, "of the last 18 months of account activity. You'll find the highlights flagged." She opened the folder and began to pull the pages out one by one, placing them neatly between them like cards in a final hand. "This one," she said, tapping the top page, "shows the $300 withdrawal from a joint account in late July. Gift cards purchased at a pharmacy in Lexington. Nate was in Arizona that weekend, but his card was used." Nate blinked. "I don't even remember." Helen didn't stop. "This next one details the $200 transferred for landscaping services. Same day my actual gardener was paid, by me, in cash. Double charge. You might have thought I wouldn't notice." She didn't raise her voice. It was almost worse that way. Measured, surgical. A third page. "And here we have 3 separate purchases to a luxury homeware site. Shipping address wasn't mine, but the name on the purchase order was." She slid the last page forward. It was a notarized letter printed on clean cream-colored bond paper, the seal visible in the lower left. "This is a formal declaration," she said. "You are no longer authorized to make or influence any financial, legal, or medical decisions on my behalf. This includes third-party consultations, will interpretations, or family planning discussions. It has been filed with my attorney, my accountant, and my physician." She slid it across to Leslie and let it sit. For a moment, no one moved. Then Leslie let out a sharp, startled breath. "You'd cut out your own daughter?" Helen looked up slowly. "I didn't cut you out," she said. "You walked out." "I just locked the door." The air between them went cold, not dramatic, not loud, just suddenly absent of anything that had once resembled warmth. Leslie sat back in her chair, stunned into a silence that Helen suspected was more insult than reflection. Nate rubbed a hand across his jaw. "This doesn't have to go further than this." Helen met his eyes evenly. "It already has. You made choices. I made corrections." Leslie's mouth opened, but no words came. She stared at the notarized letter like it might start burning through the table. Helen stood. No drama, no speech. She simply stood, gathered her folder, and buttoned her coat. This time, she didn't leave anything behind, not even the silence. She walked through the front door and closed it quietly behind her. Tamara's car was idling at the curb, heater on, windows fogged at the edges from the cold outside. Helen opened the door and slid in without a word. Tamara looked over, lips twitching in a way that might have been a smile. "Done?" Helen buckled her seatbelt. "Almost." She glanced once at the house, still perfect on the outside, still falsely lit in every window. Then she faced forward. Tamara put the car into drive. They didn't speak until the end of the block. Helen stood at her dining table, now cleared of everything but one open folder, a calculator, and a legal pad nearly filled with dates, amounts, and initials. The windows behind her reflected her silhouette in the dark glass. Sharp shoulders, silver hair, steady hands. She didn't sigh. She didn't cry. She totaled 10 years of expenses. 10 years of just until we get through the month, we'll pay it back, and you're the only one we trust. She had receipts for the HVAC repair after Nate's roof leak, $2,700. The out-of-pocket dental work for Leslie when their insurance lapsed, $140. A week-long cruise they never invited her on, but had her pay the deposit for at $3,200. Car repairs, vet bills, hotel stays, Christmas flights, even a down payment on their second car. Just a temporary cosign they'd promised. Helen hadn't forgotten a single one. She opened a fresh document on her laptop and typed the header. Informational only. Summary of historical expenses. Covered line by line, she listed them. Date, amount, category, payee. When she was done, The total sat at the bottom in clean black type. 112,647.33. She stared at the number, not in shock, but with a strange calm. It wasn't the money, it was what the money meant. She scrolled down and typed a single sentence beneath the total. This is what love used to look like. She printed it on a single sheet of paper. No attachments, no explanations, just one page in an envelope. She addressed it to Leslie and Nate's home and walked it to the mailbox herself. She didn't use a return address. She didn't want one. Back inside, she opened her phone. One by one, she deleted their numbers, not out of rage, but strategy. Then she opened her settings and blocked both of them, watching their names disappear from her recent contacts like closing a door that had been swinging open far too long. Then she called Wes. It was nearly 7:30 p.m., but he answered on the second ring. "I'm ready to amend the will," she said. Wes didn't sound surprised. "You want to come in this week?" "I want it done by Friday, then come tomorrow," she did. The office felt colder than usual, and the lemon oil had been replaced by something more antiseptic. Maybe the cleaning crew had switched brands. Wes met her with the same quiet steadiness he always had, but even he paused when she handed him the new instructions. She spoke clearly as he read. "I want Nate and Leslie removed as beneficiaries, executors, and medical proxies. I'm replacing them with Tamara Harrison and the Safe Haven Senior Advocacy Trust in Lexington." Wes looked up. "You're sure?" "I'm done waiting for them to unhurt me," she said. Tamara met her outside afterward, leaning against the passenger side of her car with 2 coffees in a cardboard tray. "Thought you might need the good stuff," she said, handing one over. "Extra hot, half cream, no sugar, because you're sweet enough, and I refuse to let that become a hallmark moment." Helen smiled for the first time all day. "You know they'll call me bitter." "Of course they will. Bitter women don't hand out free rides. They get smart, and smart makes people nervous." They drove in silence for a while. Later that night, Helen took the original copies of the new will, slid them into her fireproof safe beside the flash drive, then shut the door with a clean click. She sat in her armchair after that, staring out the front window. The street was quiet. Porch lights glowed in pairs like bookends. Somewhere down the block, a wind chime jangled half-heartedly in the dark. Helen folded the final copy of the invoice and tucked it into her planner, not to send, but to keep. It wasn't proof. It was memory, itemized. As she turned out the light, her phone buzzed once. "Unknown sender. We got your little letter. Real classy, Mom." She stared at the message, let it sit on the lock screen for a moment, then swiped left and hit delete. No reply, no reaction. Just a quiet room, a locked safe, and the knowledge that the only thing more dangerous than being underestimated was being free. The courthouse smelled faintly of industrial coffee and old varnish. Helen sat quietly in the front row of the gallery, her handbag at her feet, a slim leather portfolio resting across her lap. She wore her navy coat, the one with the silk lining, buttoned clean to the collar. Her posture was perfect, not rigid, not forced, just grounded. Wes sat beside her, calm as ever, flipping through his notes with quiet precision. No pep talk, no legal theater, just quiet support. Across the aisle, Nate hunched over at the petitioner's table, arms folded, jaw tense. Leslie sat beside him, arms crossed, not looking anywhere but at the polished floor in front of her heels. Neither of them had spoken to Helen when she arrived. They hadn't needed to. The summons had said enough. Nate had filed a motion challenging Helen's legal competence, claiming diminished capacity, claiming recent decisions, financial and medical, were erratic, inconsistent with past behavior, and made under emotional duress without proper oversight. They were trying to undo her. Judge Ellison entered without flourish, robe flowing behind him like a slow tide. He sat and adjusted his glasses, glancing once at Helen, then at the file in front of him. "Petitioner may proceed," he said, voice even. Nate stood, cleared his throat, and began reading from a prepared statement. His voice wavered in the beginning, but grew steadier as he leaned into the role, concerned son, desperate to protect his aging mother from herself. He cited unusual behavior, withdrawal from family, sudden changes to estate documents. He paused, theatrically, before adding, "We believe my mother may be under the influence of a third party, or possibly experiencing cognitive decline." Helen didn't flinch. Judge Ellison nodded. "Respondent?" West stood. "With the court's permission, Mrs. Ward would like to address the petition directly." Ellison raised an eyebrow, then gestured. "She may." Helen stood slowly, not for effect, but to center herself. She approached the podium and adjusted the mic. Her voice, when it came, was clear. "No one wants to walk into a courtroom because their child is trying to erase their autonomy," she began. "But if I've learned anything in the last year, it's that silence has a cost." She opened her portfolio and pulled out a page. "This is an excerpt from my estate journal, January 14th. She read, "Tamara brought coffee and a printout of the new POA forms. I double-checked every line before signing. I didn't feel confused. I felt certain. Certainty is a new kind of power." Another page. April 2nd. "Leslie says the house is too much for me. Funny, she's never picked up a rake in her life. But I trimmed the hedges myself this morning. I'm still here, still lucid, still mine." She closed the folder. "I've documented everything. Medical checkups, legal consultations, financial actions. Every step, recorded and reviewed by professionals." She looked straight at the judge. "I am not declining. I am deciding." The room was quiet enough to hear the furnace kick on. Judge Ellison leaned back in his chair. "Do you have medical evidence supporting your mental capacity, Mrs. Ward?" West stood. "Submitted in advance, Your Honor. Included in the respondent's file, neurocognitive assessment by Dr. Harlow, dated 3 weeks ago. Clear findings." The judge flipped through the file, brows furrowed. Then, after a long pause, "Petitioner's claim is dismissed, without merit." He glanced at Nate. "This court does not exist to manage family tensions under the guise of guardianship. Your mother is within her rights. And she is evidently more prepared than you gave her credit for." Nate's shoulders sank. Leslie still wouldn't look up. Helen returned to her seat and gathered her things. Wes leaned over and whispered, "Well delivered." She nodded. "They thought they were playing offense." He smiled. "Turns out they never had the ball." Outside, the morning was crisp and clean. The air smelled faintly of frost and courthouse mulch. Helen paused on the steps, closed her eyes, and took one long, deep breath. The cold filled her lungs like new oxygen. Bracing, alive. She opened her eyes to see Tamara waiting at the bottom of the steps, holding 2 cups of coffee and a look that said, "I knew you would." Helen descended without hurry, her heels tapping against the concrete, each step a sound the building would remember. She didn't look back, not at the court. Not at Nate, not at anything she no longer owed. The printer hummed steadily beside Helen's desk, spitting out pages in crisp black ink. Each sheet bore her words, carefully chosen, unapologetically clear. She'd written it over 3 late nights, between tea refills and page edits, memory after memory stitched into something that read more like evidence than story. The title on the cover was simple, bold, and final. "Before You Assume I'm Too Old, A Legal Memoir." By H. M. Ward. She printed 20 copies, 43 pages each, no decorative fonts, no sentimental preface, just the reality of what had happened and how she had taken it back. At her kitchen table, she collated and stapled the last batch. The motion was mechanical now. Fold, align, press. The weight of the paper in her hands was different from the weight she'd carried all year. This weight was chosen. She tucked 1 copy into a plain manila envelope. No note, no return address. Then she grabbed her coat and keys. Tamara offered to drive, but Helen waved her off. "This one, I need to deliver alone." The HOA office where Leslie worked part-time was nestled inside a suburban development that looked like it had been pressure-washed into existence. Perfect lawns, identical shutters, wreaths hung too early for a holiday no one felt. Helen parked 2 streets over, walked. The front lobby was empty. She slipped the envelope through the building's after-hours mail slot, the thunk of paper against metal brief but satisfying. Then she turned and walked away. Let it sit. Let it circulate. She mailed 3 more copies the next morning, one to a statewide elder rights coalition. another to a nearby law school's ethics clinic, and the third to a senior resource center she once visited on a whim years ago, just in case. She sent each without fanfare. By noon, she was back home with Tamara on the porch, 2 coffees steaming between them. Tamara tapped the edge of one copy with a painted nail. "You didn't just write about them. You made them your legacy." Helen smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "No, I made sure no one else gets walked over quietly." Tamara sat back, watching her. "You think they'll read it?" "They'll dismiss it," Helen said, "until someone brings it up to them at a meeting, or emails it with their name underlined in red." Tamara raised her coffee. "To accountability." Helen didn't toast. She just took a slow sip and stood. Inside, she sat at her desk and opened her bank app. One account, one owner, one password, hers. She scrolled through the month's activity: groceries, gas, a book on trauma and family law, a modest transfer to the Safe Haven Senior Advocacy Trust. Every line made sense. Every dollar was hers. There were no sudden $300 withdrawals, no out-of-state gas charges, no unexplained fees. She stared at the balance a moment longer than she needed to, then clicked out. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves scratched against the window screen in irregular bursts. Fall was tipping into early winter, transitional, unstable, honest. A familiar ding pulled her back to the moment. Email. Subject: Feedback on legal memoir. From Director SafeHavenAdvocates.org. Helen opened it. "Dear Ms. Ward, we received your booklet yesterday and read it cover to cover. We would be honored to distribute excerpts, with your permission, as part of our outreach training for caregivers and seniors navigating legal coercion. Your story speaks with quiet force. Thank you for trusting us with it. Please let us know how you'd prefer to proceed." Helen stared at the message for a long moment, then exhaled, soft and full, like something had been released in her chest. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she opened the drawer beside her, reached for the next clean file folder, and labeled it in black ink. Vol 2, When They Push Back. And beneath that, Don't Flinch. Write anyway. The kitchen smelled like butter and sage. Helen stirred the soup slowly, the way her grandmother had taught her, always clockwise, never let it boil. Beside her, Milo flipped grilled cheese sandwiches in the cast iron pan, careful not to burn the edges. He had grown taller since summer. The last time she'd seen him, his voice had still cracked when he laughed. Now it came out even and low, though he still laughed rarely. "Mom says you're being cold," he said, watching the cheese bubble. Helen didn't turn. She reached for the pepper grinder and gave it 2 short turns over the pot. "Do you think I am?" she asked. Milo shrugged. "I don't think you're anything like how she describes you." Helen smiled, not with amusement, but something deeper, a kind of peace. "Sometimes warmth is saying no." He nodded slowly. "That's what it feels like." They ate at the small table by the window. No TV, no phones. Just soup and sandwiches and steam curling into the cold edge of late November air. Milo ate like someone who didn't expect more than what he was given, and had learned not to ask for it. After lunch, he offered to help with the basement boxes. Helen hesitated, then led him downstairs. The air was dry, the light yellowed and soft. The shelves were neatly labeled: files, records, tools. But in the back corner, behind 2 boxes of holiday decorations, sat a plastic bin marked simply "Photos." Milo pulled it down and set it on the workbench, brushing off a layer of dust. Inside were albums, labeled by year. Tucked into the bottom was a red accordion folder of loose prints. "Whoa," he said, holding up a faded Polaroid. "Is this my dad with a mullet?" Helen laughed. A short, surprised burst. It was 1989. Everyone had something to regret. They sat together on the low workbench, flipping through pages. Helen explained who was who, pointing out relatives Milo barely remembered. There were pictures of birthday cakes, camping trips, a crooked treehouse Helen had built herself the summer Nate turned 12. She watched Milo pause at one photo, Nate, age 8, sitting on a swing, legs outstretched, grinning at the sky. Helen's hand was visible on the rope behind him, steadying the seat. "He looks happy here," Milo said quietly. Helen closed the album. "He was, once." There was no anger in her voice, only memory. Later, after Milo left for his after-school shift at the bookstore, Helen sat at her desk again. The air had cooled. She pulled a cardigan over her shoulders and opened her safe. Inside was a file she had started weeks ago. Contingency. For Milo, she added a single new sheet. A small education trust. It wasn't vast, but it was real. Enough to pay for 2 years at a community college. Maybe a trade program. Or something else should he choose it. She included a letter, printed and signed in her neat, steady hand. To the one who listened, not took, this isn't repayment. It's permission to grow without guilt, to become something without strings. When people say the next generation will understand better, I think they're talking about you. Use this however you choose. And if you choose nothing at all, that's fine too. You didn't owe me kindness, but you offered it. That's enough for me. HMW. She folded the letter, slid it into the trust folder, and tucked it back into the safe. Then she closed it, turned the dial, and rested her hand on top, just for a moment. In the silence that followed, the house didn't feel empty. It felt earned. And upstairs, on the kitchen counter, Milo had left a sticky note under his empty soup bowl. Your grilled cheese is criminally underrated. Helen laughed again, louder this time. The couch was the first to go, not out the door, just out of habit. Helen dragged it 3 feet to the left, turned it to face the windows instead of the television. The afternoon light poured in from the south-facing glass, scattering across the hardwood floors in long, warm streaks. She'd spent years sitting on that couch the same way, quiet, still, waiting for the house to either settle or explode. Now, it faced the world. She liked that. The rug came next. Then the armchair shifted toward the fireplace. She replaced the heavy curtains with gauzy panels she found in the back of her linen closet, unused since a clearance sale in 2009. By dusk, the living room looked unfamiliar, brighter, open, as if the walls had exhaled. She carried in 2 new potted plants, green and spiky and alive. One by the window, one near the bookshelf. No symbolism, just oxygen. In the days that followed, Helen made a list. Not a to-do list, but a thank you list. One by one, she wrote and mailed hand-signed notes. To Wes, for your precision and your patience. To Julie at the bank, for not making me explain twice. To Dr. Harlow, for taking my clarity seriously. Each envelope was pressed with a simple return address sticker and a forever stamp. No fanfare, just gratitude. On Saturday, Tamara showed up with 2 folding chairs and a flyer. Potluck at the Grange Hall, she said. I signed us up to bring something that doesn't require refrigeration. You good with cornbread? Helen raised an eyebrow. You think I don't have a cast iron skillet? Tamara grinned. I think you've been waiting to use it on someone besides Nate. Helen chuckled and waved her in. That evening, they arrived at the Grange Hall just as the sun dipped behind the old post office. The parking lot was already full. Inside, tables stretched wall to wall, lined with casserole dishes, folding chairs, and people who didn't flinch when Helen walked in. No one asked her how old she was. No one leaned in with false sympathy or whispered questions about the situation. They asked her name, just her name. She sat next to a retired postal worker named Norma who told stories about 3 ex-husbands and a parrot that only cursed in German. Tamara disappeared into a knot of women trading recipes and laughing loud enough to make the windows shake. When someone complimented the cornbread, Helen smiled and passed the plate without explaining the recipe's origin or her own. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel famous. She just felt there, present. Afterward, as they loaded the empty pan and folding chairs into Tamara's trunk, Helen stood still for a moment and looked up at the stars. No city lights to compete, just clear, sharp constellations she hadn't bothered to look for in years. Tamara leaned against the hood, arms crossed. You're not just alone anymore, she said. You're free. Helen turned toward her, quiet for a moment. Then, same thing sometimes. Tamara didn't argue. She didn't have to. Back home, Helen walked through the front door and paused just inside the threshold. No echoes, no ghosts, no one else's voice hanging in the corners, just the scent of rosemary from the plant by the window. She walked over, adjusted the blinds, and sat on the re-angled couch. She could see the moon through the glass now, barely there, soft and thin like a healing scar. She didn't mourn the old layout. She didn't miss the people who hadn't noticed when she disappeared from their expectations. She turned on the small reading lamp beside her and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page she wrote, Volume 2, Chapter 1, This Time. I start with myself. The cafe was chosen carefully. A local spot, neutral, with wide windows and no booths, just open tables, nowhere to hide. Helen picked the one closest to the door and arrived 10 minutes early. She ordered a small coffee and left it untouched. 3 sips was all she was willing to give this meeting. Leslie arrived on time, hair perfectly smoothed, wearing the kind of coat that screamed retail therapy after a crisis. She approached with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Helen, she said, setting her purse down. Thanks for meeting. I wasn't sure you would. I said 15 minutes, Helen replied evenly. 12 now. Leslie sat across from her and took out a little notebook, as if she were there to present a pitch instead of ask for a conversation. I read some of the thing you mailed to the HOA office, Leslie started. Wasn't sure if it was meant for me, but I got the message. Helen didn't respond. Leslie continued, tone lighter. It's been a complicated year, for everyone. I think maybe I, rushed things. I think maybe you did too. That was it. The shift. The slight lean forward. The careful phrasing. The word legacy hung in the air unspoken but fully present. Helen watched her for a moment, then finally spoke. You're still negotiating, Leslie blinked. What? I'm retired, Helen said, her voice calm but immovable. From caretaking, from appeasing, from tolerating rehearsed sincerity in public spaces. Leslie flushed. This isn't rehearsed, Helen stood. You're still hoping there's an angle, still playing for a seat you no longer hold. I'm not angry, Leslie. I'm just uninterested. She didn't bother with her coat until she reached the door. Leslie's voice followed, sharper now. You can't rewrite the whole story, Helen. Helen turned back just once. I didn't rewrite it, she said. I just stopped letting you ghostwrite my chapters. Then she left. The door's soft chime was the loudest thing Leslie heard for several seconds. Tamara's car was idling at the curb. Helen slipped into the passenger seat with the same grace she carried in court, in kitchens, in every space she had reclaimed. Tamara handed her a to-go cup. Well? Helen took a slow sip. She opened with charm, slipped in a correction, ended with a pitch. Tamara raised an eyebrow. Did you expect sincerity? Helen shook her head. I expected what I got. They drove in silence for a few blocks, passing the old library, the high school, a row of trees newly bare. Helen looked out the window, steam rising from her cup. I used to think peace would feel like relief, she said softly. It doesn't. Tamara glanced over. Helen continued. It feels like stillness I don't know what to do with yet. You will, Helen nodded. Maybe. Outside, the wind carried dry leaves across the road in tight spirals. Helen watched them scatter. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel broken. She just felt clear. Helen started the day early, not out of urgency, but precision. At her desk, she opened a fresh legal pad and clicked a black pen to life. The handwriting was steady, not rushed. She'd always had good penmanship, something her second-grade teacher once called deliberate, a word Helen now wore like a badge. At the top of the page, she wrote, Final Summary, Estate Reclamation, initiated February 14, closed Nov 30. Below that, she listed every action in sequence. No embellishment, no narrative, just fact. Title correction filed with West Chapman. Confirmed March 3rd, financial access revoked. Documented March 10th, fraud reports submitted. Bank correspondence logged March 22nd. POA revoked. Notarized April 6th. Will amended. Signed May 17th. Copies of legal memoir distributed. October 12/15. Final interaction with Leslie Ward, November 18. She stapled each supporting document behind its entry. A receipt, an affidavit, a notarized page, a photo of the envelope mailed to the advocacy group. By noon, the file was complete. She printed 2 copies, each one placed neatly in its own labeled folder. The first she hand-delivered to Wes's office, setting it down on his desk with a quiet nod. Not a request, she said. Just a record, he smiled. I'll archive it with care. The second folder went to Tamara. She dropped it off in person with a bakery box in the other hand. Tamara raised an eyebrow. Documentation and dessert? Helen shrugged. Every good ending needs a sweet one. They sat together on the porch with thick slices of carrot cake and mugs of tea that cooled faster than they could drink. The sun hung low, bleeding warm gold over the horizon. Tamara took a bite. This is incredible. What's in it? Forgiveness, Helen said. Not for them, for myself. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. Later that afternoon, Helen drove 2 garbage bags full of gently worn winter coats to the women's shelter across town. She didn't fill out the donor form. She didn't ask for a receipt. Just left them with the receptionist and left. She stopped at the nursery on the way home, bought 3 dozen bulbs, tulips, daffodils, crocuses, and spent an hour planting them along the walkway leading to her front porch. The soil was cold but still soft enough to work. She didn't rush. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched long across the lawn. Each bulb tucked into earth felt like a decision. Small, quiet, final. After cleaning up, she made herself a small dinner, toast, soup, and the last sliver of carrot cake. She poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and watched the last slant of daylight vanish into dusk. It wasn't dramatic, just honest. A few minutes later, she found the envelope tucked inside the screen door. No stamp, no name on the front. Just her own. Helen. She opened it slowly. Inside was a birthday card. Handmade. Folded construction paper, marker lettering, glitter, too much glue. Happy birthday, Helen. You're my favorite grown-up. Milo. She pressed a hand over her mouth, not to hide a sob, but to slow down something big and warm that had risen too fast to contain. She set the card on the mantel beside the rosemary plant, where it would catch the light each morning. Then she returned to her desk, opened her notebook to the last page, and wrote one line under the words Volume 2, Chapter 1. I thought I was cleaning up the mess, but I was clearing space. Helen read the message twice before acting. Maybe one day you'll realize what you walked away from. Family isn't paperwork. Unknown number. She didn't waste energy wondering which one sent it. The tone was too polished for Nate, too self-satisfied for Leslie. It didn't matter. They hadn't texted her. They'd texted who they thought she still was. Helen calmly opened the contact card, marked it, "Do not reply," then deleted it entirely. Not blocked, not archived, just gone. Then she stood, stretched slowly, and reached for her scarf. The afternoon sun was low and crisp through the window, and the sidewalks outside were dry enough to trust. She zipped her coat, slid her keys into her pocket, and stepped out the door without checking her phone again. The air was brisk but generous. Each inhale felt earned. She walked without purpose but with intention, down the block, past the church whose bell she no longer heard, past the small park where she used to sit when she needed quiet but couldn't find it at home. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, but she had. 2 streets over, she passed a small white sedan with its doors open. A young couple, mid-30s maybe, stood flanking an older woman, steadying her as she lowered herself gently into the passenger seat. The woman moved slowly but with dignity. Helen caught the daughter's eye. They exchanged a brief smile, quiet, knowing, no performance. Helen nodded once and continued on. By the time she returned home, dusk had folded over the rooftops. Tamara was waiting on the porch, one foot tucked under her, thermos in hand. "You missed the mail by 5 minutes," she said. "But I made chai. That's better." Helen smiled, took the mug, and sat beside her. The porch light clicked on overhead. The rosemary bush near the stairs rustled gently in the wind. They talked about nothing, the way only people who've been through everything can. They laughed too hard at something neither would remember later. At one point, Tamara nearly spilled her tea, and Helen snorted so loudly she startled a bird from the gutter. "I haven't laughed like this since college," Tamara said, wiping her eyes. "You didn't know me in college," Helen replied. "Well," Tamara said, "maybe I did in a past life. You had a vibe." Inside, Helen took off her coat and set the mug in the sink. She walked to her desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the final file. Living Trust, confirmed. She leafed through it slowly, methodically. Her house, her accounts, her wishes. Every name exactly right. No one added out of guilt. No one removed out of revenge. Just clarity. She closed the file, slid it back into the safe, and let her hand rest briefly on the lid. Then she walked to the front hall and opened the mail Tamara had collected. A charity flyer. A small thank you from the shelter. One envelope from her bank confirming the automatic donation to Safe Haven. Nothing owed, nothing requested. She exhaled, long and quiet. In her bedroom, she changed into soft flannel pajamas and slipped into bed. The street outside was calm. The world was smaller now, but more hers. She reached for the notebook on her nightstand and flipped to the final page. At the bottom, beneath her last note about Milo's card, she wrote a single sentence. When I fell, they laughed that I needed a reminder of my age. I gave them a reminder of mine, printed on every legal document they used to depend on. Then she closed the book, and finally, slept like someone who owed no one a thing.